Hello, everyone, and hello, Dave. How are you today?
Hey Ryan, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing really good. Hey, super excited to have you here. Super excited for what we're going to do for this updated new version of StudioRack, a plugin chainer. Really quickly, can you just give us an idea of what this plugin enables the user to do and your overall thoughts before we just dive into your session and see how you have implemented it?
Yeah, well, StudioRack has been around for a while, and it's basically like a channel strip that you can insert any number of plugins and then save that. And of course, we all know that all the DAWs can do that too. But what makes StudioRack different is that when you save it in the Waves save menu, you can then open it in a different DAW. So let's say you had a great vocal chain in a Logic session and you ported the thing to Pro Tools so that some other engineer could mix it. You can then open up that StudioRack chain and have exactly the same chain. So that was an exciting development that it was cross-platform. And then in this new reimagination, they added some modules, which we'll talk about. We talk about them in my videos that are now online, but a parallel rack, a multi-band rack, and macros. So we can talk about that. And also, I want to thank everybody for just showing up on a Monday afternoon. And if you have questions, just type them into the chat, and Ryan will moderate them. And we can break away from the discussion if something occurs to you that you really want me to elaborate on. I'm happy to do it. Very informal, and we'll just take it from there.
Absolutely. So I think the power behind StudioRack, this plugin chainer, enables you out there, the user, to essentially create your own signature series plugins. So many of our signature series plugins, they only have a few parameters with a lot going on behind the scenes. And now this is
Right.
your chance to create that and create your own presets. And like Dave said, open them up in different DAWs. So speaking of presets, Dave has created for the StudioRack plugin a few presets, and we're going to use that as somewhat of a springboard to guide and go through this session and see how Dave has implemented them. So with that, we're going to switch over, Dave, to your computer.
Yep.
And now let's give you the wheel
Okay.
and work through your session and see how you're using StudioRack here.
Sure. Well, this is the same. This is the rock song that I used in the videos, and it's if you've watched any of my other mix videos, it's set up the way I like to do it with the drums on the left, and then through the guitars and keyboards and the background vocals, and then the auxes, and finally the mastering. But if you notice here, everything's in StudioRack. If I'm using even one plugin or seven plugins, they're all first of all, it makes the session look very elegant and very easy to get around on.
Absolutely.
And so you can see even some groups. This is the tom group. So what's going on here? Okay, a little Q1 and a little compression, and then just saved as the tom sub. Here's the kick drum, all kinds of different stuff. And you can freestyle in StudioRack the same way you would freestyle in your DAW. Oh, what happens if I put a compressor? What happens if I put two compressors? And then you can turn them on and off. That's this blue light here. If you right click on them, you can disable them right here or remove them. So you can just kind of keep building and kind of keep saving. So in this example for the videos, I said, well, why don't I just try to mix the whole song with Waves plugins and with StudioRack? And so that's the bass. There's quite a few guitars. It's a rock song, and the guitars are recorded in stereo with two different mics. So each of the guitars goes through its own subgroup, and then in order to get different stuff happening on the different guitars, I would use different processing on the different sounds, just by way of making things have color and be interesting, not the same thing on every time. As far as deep dives, there's three plugins that are included in the release of mine. They went to a lot of engineers and got some really great stuff, and the designers also added the Waves presets. So there's a lot of good stuff in the preset rack. If you go to load, here's the artists and here's myself. I have three and they came from this session. They worked they worked out from doing the videos. And honestly, when they approached me to do the videos, I thought, why do I need StudioRack? What's it going to do? And then they said, well, we have multiband. And I thought, wow, you know what? I have multiband. So if you're thinking, why do I want this and what does it do that I can't already do? Trust me, I had the exact same initial reaction until I started digging in.
Right.
So let's just look at my, let's, for example, take the vocal. So I thought, let me build a preset that, for somebody who's just starting out, maybe I tend to put everything that I might use in here. And it doesn't mean that they have to be on when you turn them on. You'll see in some of my multiband splits, out of the 4 multibands, maybe only 1 is engaged, but the others are there to be engaged if you should need them. So that's how I think about the ways real-time tune, for example. If the vocal doesn't need tuning, I would just disable this, bypass it, or maybe even disable, depending on how much CPU stuff. After that, I had an SSL channel, which is my kind of go-to EQ. One of the reasons SSL was so popular in the 90s and the 2000s was that their natural EQ points were very, very musical and right where you wanted to do things to a lot of instruments like guitars and vocals.
Dave, real quick,
sure.
Could you, when you pull up those plugins there, just center them to the screen real quick? We've got your lovely face kind of cropping that off.
Oh,
and
well, my face is much more important than an SSL channel.
You briefly mentioned CPU. We've been getting a couple questions talking about if you have a lot of instances of StudioRack in your session, or if you have many instances of reverbs, compressors on parallel splits.
Yeah.
Let's talk about maybe that green SG logo and CPU with StudioRack.
Right. The CPU usage is going to be this. If you're working in native, it's going to be the same as whatever you're using. So if you start to stack up a lot of stuff and the CPU gets a little heavy, then maybe you should decide which ones you're going to use. But what I'm using is called SoundGrid, and that's a server. So when I run this session, which is really big, my system doesn't really use much power.
Wow, look at that.
That's just really the Pro Tools mixers, and I might have a couple of Pro Tools things here and there, and it's pulling the sound off the disc. I apply some memory to disk cache so that the sounds can load up in the RAM.
Yeah.
But you can split if you have a SoundGrid server. You can offload everything, which I did in this case just because I don't want any hiccups during the video. But as I was building this session, I was running it native, and it was fine. It's only when you get to like really heavy mastering stuff, some of the stuff in my mastering chain is very CPU intensive, the linear EQs and the maximizers and stuff like that. But
so that's pretty cool. Yeah.
You can really have a lot of stuff going on, and you can this goes back to as I was talking about having things ready in case you don't use them. I just had all my options right there with a number of different compressors, a multi-band compressor right here. So maybe this vocal doesn't need it. I'll, turn it off or immobile or disable it. I wanted to just give people all the options that I would think of in vocal processing, let's say, or in mastering. Maybe I don't need linear EQ multiband in this case. Maybe I don't need a full multiband compressor, or maybe I need more bands. You can add or subtract bands if you want.
That's very cool.
So it's very plastic, very elastic, and you can be very creative. And then now we haven't even started talking about the macros, which is what you're talking about with the CLA and the Maserati and the Manmark and stuff, like
right.
Where one parameter that you see in a CLA vocal might be doing a lot of stuff under the hood. So at some point today we can talk about how that's done, how it's assigned, and it's really a wide open thing. One of the things I really want to show today is that the guitar solo, which the guitarists invented macros for the guitar solo, and they're things I wouldn't have thought about as an engineer because they're so
Right.
wacky, but they're awesome. They're
That's
so great.
awesome. Well, yeah.
And that's what rock and roll is about. When the Beatles were starting to chop up bits of tape and throw them up in the air and put them back together, it's like, come on, let's go crazy. Let's try to find something that works. You can't put up my vocal channel and say that's always going to work for vocals. It's going to work for the vocals when you tweak it to what you're putting into it.
Exactly. So they can use an artist like yourself and your presets, tweak them to their
As
own
a jumping
likings.
off point. Yeah,
Exactly. And then save
these
that preset
presets
for
are
their own.
correct, correct, and modify it. Name it for yourself. It's totally fine. That's what it's all about. There's when I look back on my career, the engineers that really helped me were the ones that shared, and the ones that were kind of snobby and didn't share. I don't think of them in the same light that I think about the guys that took a minute to say, "Here's what I'm doing, Dave, and here's why you should do it." So let's pass it forward. And all those guys, all these artists that have contributed to these presets, feel the same way. And all the waves plugins have these kinds of things from guys that Here's Maserati, Devin Townsend, Alan Meyerson. These are guys that are working every day with all different kinds of program material, and so these are the settings that would be a starting point for them. It's not to say they're going to put that on every time a voice comes up.
Right.
I tried to make my presets good for an individual channel or a group channel. So that's why in my drum preset there's a bunch of reverbs. Now that doesn't mean you necessarily want to put an arena on the whole drum kit, but maybe this would be good on the toms. Maybe you put this on the toms. But in matter of fact, in this case, a little bit of the arena, which is the Manny Hall, it actually worked. So I put a little bit on, and some punch and some gated verb here with H verb and a C1 gate.
Right. Let's either go back to the vocal preset that you had pulled up,
Sure.
or maybe your mastering chain, and kind of walk through it with the mindset of like, okay, maybe someone that is just doesn't really know anything. What is StudioRack? Maybe let's use this as an example to define what StudioRack is, who it's for. Just by, like, I can see you have the view set to all, so we can see all of these parameters. Maybe let's just go through that.
Okay, well, if in its simplest form, it looks like this. Let me shut that down and put it in the middle. So it's in its simplest form, it's a chainer, right? So we have, what do we have? 8. I filled it up like, what might I ever need in voice? Tuning, EQ, gentle compression, multiband compression, de-essing. These are parallels. Like when you think of parallel, I think of like when I send and return. Over here, these green faders are my reverb return. So that's what a parallel is. You have the normal unprocessed one, and then you have a bunch of different effects that you can add by raising or lowering the volume. These are like effects returns in a parallel thing. Then after that, you might want to squash the whole thing again with the effects, and then you might want to have some help with the automation. So I just try to think of every possible thing that I might use in preparing vocals, and then some of them can be attached to macros. So let's go to the all.
What exactly is a macro?
Okay, a macro is a one knob that controls more than one thing. Sometimes it can just control one thing. So let's watch. Here's the echo, right? So this is my delay. So the vocals are all going through this chain, including a bunch of effects, right? Some quarter note or dotted eighth note, a kind of a rockabilly slap, some plate reverb, and some doubling, some harmonizing. So I made this macro. So if I don't have all the stuff open and I just want to add a little bit of that echo, I turn this knob, right? Yeah. But watch what's happening here. Watch this level. See what it's doing? It's raising and lowering my echo. This is kind of like the front. If you think of Maserati vocals or CLA vocals, this would be considered the front panel. And this is all going on underneath the hood where you as a user don't see it. So this is a kind of a signature plug-in maker for yourself where you have access to be under the hood. If I want to have more rockabilly slap, you see number 3 is going up.
Fantastic. And so you have those macros set up basically as your return faders.
These four are return faders. And if we look at the edit window, you can see that. So the echo controls the output of rack 2. Rack 2 is right here, right? Number 1, number 2.
Right.
Slap is number 3. Very simple, straightforward, but it's very useful, right?
Correct. So
another thing you can do. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I noticed in your settings there, you had some parameters on the right side where you could define how much a macro controlled. I noticed one parameter.
This?
Yeah, maybe let's dive in about that. What's that all about, and how'd you do that?
Okay, so that's the low pass frequency in the radio setting. So radio setting, I just did a very simple one with the SSL, right? Using the filters. So if let's try to get it so we can see everything at the same time.
Perfect.
If I turn, you see as I turn the radio button up, you see how it's rolling off?
Absolutely. So that's moving more than one parameter as well.
Yeah, but right, it's moving 2 parameters, but down here, it's only moving the low. So I'm filtering up and getting thinner and thinner and more phone, but I'm leaving all the highs until we get to this point, and then the highs kick in and move down. Now that's what you were seeing with this right here. So this low pass thing doesn't really kick in until I get the knob to here.
Very cool.
Right, it could be, if I put it at 0, let's go back to it now. With it at 0, it should start moving right away. See, as soon as I move down here, it's moving. But I kind of didn't want that. I didn't want to start rolling off highs at that point. So that's just a very simple example of how you can really get in here and tweak and make this stuff operate exactly what you're trying to do. This button right here is an inverse. So if I flip this button, it would start at the top and come down the other way. So you have complete flexibility. It's kind of amazing, and you need to spend like an hour and just going, okay, what would I do to this? Let's say you have a Rhodes track or something. Okay, you might have some echo, you might have some EQ, you might have a chorus. And then like, okay, well, what would I do in the solo? Maybe bring up some more delay or whatever, and just start letting your mind automate this, particularly to that instrument, it's within your mix, so that plugin then really applies to that fader or that group fader.
Exactly.
And then save it. And save it and save it and save it and save it with a different name, and then you tweak it and throw out the ones you don't like. If you hold Command, when you go to load, it'll erase. You can delete. Oh. See, I saved everything for this song for the videos as I was working, and I kept tweaking them, and then I would delete kick in and save it again and that kind of thing, or save it as kick in 2 or kick in 3. There's no penalty for saving your work as you go, and then finally deciding, okay, this is really it, and then that's going to be my preset.
Fantastic. I notice you have both a multi-band split and a parallel split here in this preset. Let's go over multi-band splits as a whole and parallel splits and how powerful they are and all the different parameters. I see each one has a pan knob. We've got volume. We have crossover frequencies. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so when you first open up one, it's just 2, but you can have up to 5, I believe, is the maximum, right? So yeah, the plus sign goes off when I get to 5. So the first thing that came to mind, what do you hear about multiband? Well, multiband compression. Everybody knows about that. So when you open up a C4 or a C6, you have those parameters of C4 or C6, and they're very well defined and they work great. But what if your favorite compressor is the CLA2A, or in this case, the R compressor. R compressor is really great because it's super easy to read and just kind of works. And I have it dialed in here. In my preset, I have it null. So there's no threshold, and it's not doing anything. Because depending on the voice, if the voice is boomy, I'm going to want to take out lows. But I only want to take out those lows when they exist. So right. when the singer sings low down here, it might be boomy. But if he starts yelling up here, it might not be boomy. So if I EQ that out, it's gone
forever.
All the time. Yeah. It's gone all the time. It's gone in the high notes and it's gone in the lows. But if I use a threshold where it detects how much energy is in that band, which this band is between 100 and 500, let's say. So between bass and room noise, that's that area. Then up here is the general scale tones of the music, where the guitars and the keyboards and the voices are. Then up here would be basically a de-esser. So, if you want to have a de-esser, you bring this down and you rock your threshold and you watch the vocal, watch the gain reduction in the vocal until you're de-essing in just the right way. So I often use multiband. I use multiband on my music fader here and my vocal fader. I don't know if this is centered enough for you guys to see it. I don't have them in here now, but sometimes your music is sounding really full and rich, but then you put a multiband in and just knock out a little bit of this low mid stuff, and suddenly you got all this clarity that you maybe didn't have before.
And I think the beauty of this multiband split function within StudioRack is you can use whatever compressor you want. Compressors have different colors.
What's your favorite? And do you like the Neve one? Do you like the Puig Child, for example, which is a very warm, tubey, natural record sounding compressor. The CLA 76 is very aggressive and very awesome. The API 2500 is very aggressive. And so some of my friends who I know are actually watching this right now, he actually showed me some stuff on the 2500 that just, his piano sounds are just killing with that one. So, you develop your favorites. They all do the same sort of job, but especially those ones that are modeled after real gear. Waves has done an excellent job of capturing the color of that gear, and that comes from the transformers, from all the circuitry, from the hand wiring. All that stuff lent a character to those venerable and pieces of gear that we hold in high esteem. So you can use them as colorations. That's part of the tiers of mixing, right? So when you first mix, you get a good balance, you get some ambience. Now you start to color with your choices, and then finally you chain things together. Like the big time engineers will put a chorus at the end of a reverb, for example. Or a reverb at the end of a delay, for example.
Speaking of reverbs and delays, maybe let's move on to the parallel split and see what you've done there, and maybe talk about, again, the parameters of the parallel split in StudioRack as a whole. Maybe go over the panning function there, and maybe the instance that makes that uniquely special here in StudioRack, and just how you've used this.
Well, you've got some basic, you've got the basic parameter. This is gain, level. You can increase or lower it. This is phase flip if that's necessary. And then you've got your 8 slots. You can solo it, so you could, if you got a lot going on and you just want to hear what's going on with that. This would be the output pan, right? And this is the output. This is the input level. This is the output level, right? As we showed over there. This is like an S1. It's the width. So if you hold this down, you see how that blue half circle is getting wider. More 1.0 would be normal width, right? And then wider or narrower. Sometimes you just want that effect coming right up the middle. For example, a parallel compressor is doing the most good in the center of the image as opposed to the sides of the image. Sorry, I keep smacking the mic. I'm sure that sounds good.
Very nice.
And you can also invert. You see how when I went past 0 and I'm in minus numbers now, numerically minus, we can flip it. So what if you had a drum kit, and it sounds good audience perspective, but how about drummer's perspective? audience perspective, drummer's perspective, boom, like that,
Easy as that.
or the highs and lows on a grand piano. But maybe the grand piano should be the other way around. So let's see what happens if we put the lows on the left and the highs on the right, kind of thing.
And we can
Or,
adjust
or
the whole image as well, right? Within the
yeah,
S1 built in?
you can take this and tip it, right? Like you can in the S1. That's called the tilt in the S1. So you can widen it out and then tip the whole thing all the way to the right. So you have a super wide piano that now lives on the right side of your mix.
Very cool.
So it's pretty useful, especially like in film. I'm actually working on a film right now where I'm using this function quite a bit to get things apart from each other, but still give me that wide cinematic, THX thing where, holy man, this sound is coming at me from everywhere, but it just sounds so wide. Now the rockabilly slap would in the old days be a mono tape recorder, so that's going to be narrower and come up the middle.
Right.
The plates I have normal, and I think I did a little widening. Yeah, I did some widening on the ADT, the John Lennon double tracking, because I just love the way that sounds.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you just love stuff, and that becomes your sound. Like not everybody uses a real ADT, but I use it pretty religiously. Not so that it's audible, but it gives me a dimension to the voice that I feel like really improves the mix.
Absolutely.
And then after that, I would think I was doing a little. What was I doing here? I think I was doing just a little bit of compression. No, not much. I had this at the ready in case I felt like I wanted to filter it a little bit. I remember that's why I put that in there. Because sometimes you want to EQ the results of these things. So you could simply add, a channel at every step, and just put another thing there. You don't have to use it, and it's the same drag and drop like any. See what I'm doing? So let's have an EQ at the end of all these processes. Maybe it's making things a little too shrill and too high. Okay, let's low pass a little bit. That kind of thing, and then save with a different name, and it's unbelievable. You can just keep building these cantilevers out. Like within the parallel split, you can put a multiband.
Very
right.
Cool.
So you could let's say here for whatever reason, I'm just freestyling now.
Look at that.
For whatever reason, I need to multiband process the result of my double tracking, right?
So you can put splits within splits.
Yeah, splits. I call it the cantilever mode because look how much stuff I got going on.
Oh my gosh!
But then I can collapse it, just down to the rack.
Right.
If you double click on these things, they go away. And so there's all that stuff going on under the hood within this one little tiny window, and it's out of your face in the mix.
Right.
Like that. Boom.
It's beautiful, and like you said earlier, it takes up less real estate there within your DAW.
Look how clean this looks. I mean, it looks like you're looking up at a board almost, and the outboard audio is in the rack behind me. Let's say
exactly, and
so you really concentrate on your faders, or you're concentrating in this over here on your arrangement, and you can see this is an automation of macro 5. Right, you can automate all the macros if you want to within StudioRack. So let's see what's macro 5. I think it's verb, if I'm not mistaken. Where's my macros? There they are. Oh, it's the echo. Right, it's the quarter note. It's the quarter note echo, the dotted eighth note echo. So I brought it down in the verses and then up in the choruses. See, right? Here's the verse, here's the B section, here's the chorus. So I added an echo in the chorus and a little bit more echo. It's a very common mix technique,
right.
wetter in the big parts. But the macro is doing it for me with one automation.
Awesome. So automation, we see your session here. One thing we have yet to do is actually hear this wonderful session. So why don't we do a little bit of before and after, and maybe take us through your mastering chain. We've gotten a couple requests for that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's watch it.
It's meaningless to try
Okay, so first in the chain, and I've talked to a lot of mixers about this. Almost every mix engineer, if you're not even mastering, they will use a console bus, like the Neve or the API or SSL. I grew up in the 80s and 90s on SSLs, and this is what helped glue the record together. But I don't use it super heavily. I use it, if you watch what's happening, it's 1, 2, 3 dBs. And it's kind of basically working off the snare hit, which I like my snares loud. So that would be the first thing. Secondly, as I was talking before, I made a multiband compressor out of my favorite easy to use compressor. Not necessarily my favorite color, but because it's easy. Now watch how this changes the sound when I make it more. Okay, so that's all the low mids between 5.5 and 100. But that's where when you have something, let's go to a different, like when more guitars come in and stuff like that. So you're not really taking away volume from those guitars. They're still filling up a lot of space, but you're taking away that mud down there, and leaving some room for other things like the bass and the lower part of the vocal. So that would be my second, a bus compressor like a board, and then in mastering a multi-band compressor. After that, if I felt that the mix had some EQ issues down the bottom, you can see that neither one of these EQs is being used right now, but they're there in case I needed them. Let's say I needed just a little bump, just to make things a little. I'm sorry to talk over the music. I don't know if you can hear me, but let's say I needed the vocal to pop forward, or the excitement factor to pop forward, coming out of speakers in a restaurant or in a concert situation. So that's going to be in your upper middle part right there. So that's just a post EQ. It doesn't have to be linear phase. It can be whatever you want. It can be Renaissance. Where is it REQ?
Yes.
Yeah, so it could be REQ. It could be whatever EQ you like. It could be the Puigtex or whatever, right? This is just your post EQ after you've mixed your record as nicely as you can with your individual fader EQs. Sometimes you need an EQ on post at the end of the whole thing. Sometimes you don't. So then, now that we've got it EQ'd and compressed, then it would be time to maximize. So in this case, I use the L3. I go back and forth between the L3 and the L316.
Would you be able to move the L3 down just a little bit?
Sure.
There we go. Perfect.
Okay. Now this macro here is working the threshold. Right? So the more I turn up loud, the threshold goes down, the record gets louder. And you don't want to use it so much that these guys are crushing everything, but this is one way to get good volume. After that, I have a meter, so we can see what our long term and our short term is. And long term is getting much, much more important now with the streaming services having their auto leveling functions and everything. I find myself mixing less hot than I used to. Some clients still want it just as crushed as can be, but I'm trying to hit maybe that's really plenty loud for streaming. Maybe it could be a little louder for CD. And I also like to work off VU meters. I set my my calibration to 11, which because you're always going to go in, you're always going to push up into the red. I don't care who you are. So 12 would be Spotify, and 11, if I go up in the red on 11, I know, okay, I'm getting close. So you can see like we're hitting a nice 0 at -11. We're probably a little loud at -12. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah. But we're not hearing any artifacts. And so I use this tandem. These are my two guys, right? The WLM and the VU. And between those two, if I'm not in any penalty situation, then I'm good. I'm cool. And I know that I can deliver that to a CD pressing plant or to a management company or a record label, and it's going to be fine.
So I noticed you're toggling between the loudness meter and the VU meter. There's a way in StudioRack, right? So we can see both of those parameters at once?
I think I can. I don't know that. How do we do that, right?
So within StudioRack, oh yeah, no. So the very top right next to clear all, you see a pin icon on the loudness meter.
Oh yes, I did. I just learned about this actually, and you might have been the one that told me. Why is that coming up with locations? Oh, because my arm is on the keyboard. Sorry about that.
And then if we do the same to the VU meter.
Right. So now, okay. So.
And also,
very cool. That pin is very cool.
Right. Say if we were to see these every time we pull up StudioRack, well, if we close the StudioRack plugin and then reopen it, these windows should pop up along with it.
Yeah. They're basically saving your configuration of Windows like that.
Exactly. Very user-friendly. And say, what if we want to swap where the VU meter and loudness meter plus are within your chain?
I think you just drag it, right? Am I wrong about that? Yeah.
Nope, you're exactly correct, which is one of my favorite features. I'm sure we've all been there in Pro Tools where we go to move something.
So Logic does that and Pro Tools doesn't. And you know, everybody that knows me knows I'm Pro Tools guy. I mix in Logic when I have to, but I gotta say there's some things, you know, I'm sure every DAW has things that they have really nailed, and you know, Logic is very good with that. You can just drag things back and forth, and so this implements that sort of style of working where, you know, what if I want EQ after everything, which was probably not a great idea because you'll clobber this EQ with volume, but just, you know, you can do it, or you know, put it before. You see how I'm dragging those things up and down,
just
and they're
the
moving.
ease of drag and drop.
Right.
So speaking of DAWs, we had a question from Offbeat Bryce asking, do you prefer certain DAWs for the rack and plugins, different DAWs each having their own different layouts? I think you kind of just answered that with Pro Tools, but.
So, you know, Pro Tools, a lot of there's two reasons that pro engineers who grew up in the big room studios like Pro Tools. Let me close this out. So number one, we had a tape with a track sheet, which is here, and we had a board, and that's all we had. And we didn't look at a lot of stuff. We looked at our VU meters once in a while. We watched our compressors lighting up and we mostly listened. So this layout with you know, you can only have one or two windows open. You know, it has sub windows like the system usage window, but they're just very specialized. The main DAW is this 1 2 1 2 1 2. Yep. That's all we need. So we have you can think of it like a score paper. You know, this is your arrangement, and here's your parts coming and going. You can also think of it like a tape, like tracks on tape. So it's very comfortable to us old gray-headed guys. And when digital came out, these were the guys that were making the records. So the studios, I mean, you're never going to go in a recording studio with you know 48 inputs and 3 booths and a giant live wood room and go, hey man, you got Logic? It's not going to happen. You know, whether that's good or bad, I'm sure great records are made in Logic. I know they are, and Logic is really fast and really easy to use, and I use it often. A lot of my clients and my good friends mix in it, and they're super speedy and they invent stuff that I would never have thought about. but it's like anything. It's a comfort zone. Is
Right.
Ford better than Chevy? No, not necessarily. But Ford makes the pickup trucks and Dodge makes the cop cars. And what are
There
you
you
going to do?
go.
That's
Right.
the way it is.
And that's the beauty though about StudioRack though is, we're
You can
all welcome.
bounce between.
Yeah.
You can bounce between and save, and I do. And Waves is one of the few companies you can even save your CLAs and all that in Logic, which I often do as somebody porting something out from Logic into Pro Tools for the final mix. A lot of times the guys come with it really kind of done in Logic. So I always tell them, like, bounce it out with everything you got going, unless it's something that I see that's really not good. But then I'll mix, meaning I'll take it to the next level from having mixed tons of records. We're just using my vibe from having done it so many times. I mean, you could say that about plumbing, you could say that about roofing, anything. Yeah, I could hammer roofing shingles, but the guy that's put on 2,000 roofs is going to do it in 2 hours. It's because he's done it 2,000 times. So that's really what we're talking about. And so when people start mixing, I get emails all the time. I'm just starting, and what can you tell me? And here's what I can tell you: keep doing it. Mix, mix, mix. Just like songwriting, write, write, write. Just like singing, sing, sing, sing. There's no easy way to become a writer. There's no easy way to become a mixer. You have to keep mixing and listening and going back. What do I like about this? What don't I like? And you're going to go through styles too. I'm in a different style here in 2020 than I was in 1995 by a long shot, because of the way we're working, because of the development of technology, because of the moving target of taste. Right? If you go back and
Absolutely.
listen to those LA and Babyface ballads, they're soaking wet. And then Mary J. Blige came along, and suddenly everything dried up. And now Adele has got us soaking wet again. So it's like cuffs. Do we have cuffs on our pants this year or not? Or straight legs.
Yeah,
And you
exactly.
got to be part of that. You have to be. One of Miles Davis's greatest things was like being part of your life and times.
Right.
Or Bob Dylan, for example, when he brought the electric guitars to the Newport Folk Festival, and people were screaming Judas, and guess what? He invented a complete genre,
Right.
electric folk, and the Byrds and the Hollies and everything that came after. And then he progressed. After that, he didn't stay in one place. So you as a mixer, and you as a songwriter, and you as a producer have to grow that way. You have to keep morphing with your life and times. And even guys that are older than me, they're doing it, are learning. I talk to them all the time about this. Of course, we have our things that we're comfortable with. I know my speakers, I know my room, I know my levels, I know what sounds good, but something might come along that might make it better. You have
Right.
to stay open to it. So that was my mix advice.
Yeah, well, hey, I could sit and listen to that for hours, and we're getting lots of feedback as well. Leslie Carter says, Dave,
Leslie, how are you?
she says, you put
That's
your
my
money where
old
your
buddy.
mouth is. Anything you say has been extremely valuable to her. So, uh, yeah. Taking a couple of questions now. Ben has a question that I thought was pretty interesting relating to multi-band. He was wondering, what's it look like? Is there availability possibility that he could potentially multi-band using gates?
Oh yeah, you can multiband really using anything. So yeah, if you wanted to gate just a low frequency, for example, one of the things I wanted to get to before we run out of time is this is the guitar thing that I was telling you about. That Gitai, the producer of this song, created for this thing. So he's got all these parallels which are doing different things, and within the parallel, he's got multibands. Now the reason for that is so that the sound can come through unadorned, and then the multiband. So this one he calls Insanity, and if you just look at it, there's different stuff going on at all the different places. So a dotted 16th in the low mids, a dotted eighth in the lows, a panner in the highs, not even related, and a reverb on the super highs for some swoosh kind of vibe. And so Insanity just brings that up. So let's go to the guitar solo real quick. I hope this translates well in here, because I just thought this was so brilliant. let's solo the guitar and crank the insane.
Certainly
So,
insane.
so you hear that high wash on
Oh
the
yeah.
on the top, and then in the sonic picture, the middle is bouncing around left, right, left, right. You see that panning, bubbling? That's because of the Brower,
Right.
right? That's not, no, not this one. That's so let's stick our tongues out and create a death metal guitar solo with some panning only in the upper mids. And so I just thought that was really cool. Then the next parallel is, he calls it metal box, which is basically a tape, and then an exciter, and then a flanger. So that sounds like this.
Would you be able to move StudioRack just a smidge
Oh yeah.
to the
Sorry.
left?
How's that?
That's great. Thank you.
So this parallel only has two, because it's just returning the metal box. Here's with nothing, and then this volume here is where we're going to return metal box. A super flangy tape echo, shiny Aphex oral exciter.
Oh yeah.
Then rinse and repeat, I think, is his multiple echoes, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so we have a bunch of delays on different frequencies at different times. That's all. So 200, 400, 800.
Again, showing the fact that you can put a multi-band split on a parallel split.
Yeah. So the reason he's using the parallels is because it's a send and return, right?
Yep.
If I don't return anything, you're not hearing it, right? But if I start to return, so that's basically a stomp pedal kind of a thing, where they built into the stomp pedals, they have 4 or 5 voices of delays and set to different timing. So that's just that one alone is worth keeping around for your guitar. And then his pressure is set to the Renaissance X, so that's the compressor kind of vibe. Let's get that set so we can see it. Are you seeing everything okay?
That's great.
Okay. So you can hear that in the sound. So the Renaissance Axe on instruments and our Vox on vocals, they're just so simple and so great. And
Right.
If you notice, as we crank this up, eventually he starts to bring the gain down. And I find myself doing that often on our Vox too. The more you squash it, if you leave the gain alone, it will seemingly get louder. So if you're just looking for the squash, you bring the output down with the squash, so that it's sort of auto-correcting.
Bounces, yeah.
Auto-correcting. And you can set these levels. It doesn't have to be so dramatic. You can set where in the throw it happens, and what the max or minimum value would be right there.
You've got a handful of people, both David Kane, Casio, all saying thank you so much, that this is fantastic content.
Oh, great.
Hello from Brazil. So you've got fans in Brazil. David.
I tried to put a Brazil background on, but you wouldn't let me. You made me have my suburban home studio. But I was in Ubatuba, Brazil, a year ago, Easter. Beautiful. And it was the most beautiful place on the planet, one of the most beautiful places on the planet. And a good friend of mine, Ciro Batista, actually hails from there. And when I showed him the photos, he was like, "You went to where I was born." And it's the most incredible beach you ever saw, with these like mushroomy looking mountains coming out in the bay. It's unbelievable.
Beautiful.
Anyway, hello to Brazil. Abrazos.
So as we start to wrap up, again, let's kind of reopen the conversation about, again, StudioRack. This is obviously an incredible plugin, worlds of possibilities.
What does it do and why do you need it? Well, number one, the more elegant you are in your DAW, and this is kind of like a personal, this is a religious philosophy of mine. Elegance is primo. Like if you're doing getting more but doing less, then you're mixing well.
Right.
So I love this elegance where I have a lot of stuff going on, but it's not staring at me all the time. I can access it as I need it, but then it's just kind of tucked away here. So the chaining thing right there alone is worth the price, which is, by the way, zero.
Free.
But then you have all this other stuff that you can do, which when they asked me to make some presets and talk about it in video, it's like, okay, but I don't really do that. I'm a more straight ahead guy. And they said, well, just try it out and see what you come up with. And they sent me a couple of presets that they had been working on as demos. And I was like, wow, look what this can do and look what you can save and automate. I really enjoyed automating this in this session because it was doing a couple things at once instead of two sets of automations.
Right.
It's so convenient and so elegant, and you can take it away. You can take it to any environment that you go to. If you're going to start writing with somebody and he's got Ableton, but you got that cool guitar solo setting, when it comes time to lay the guitar solo, throw it on in Ableton. There you go. You're ready to go.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the beautiful things too. This plugin, like, who is it for? Professionals, new people to mixing. It's for everyone.
Yeah, it's not that hard to work once you realize what it is actually doing. It's a giant router, really. It's like a kind of presets for your plumbing. And then you can put whatever faucets you want on all the different parts of the plumbing. And if you want to branch out on this pipe, you can branch out over here or not, and you could branch out over here on this pipe or not. So it's a kind of a plumbing toolkit, really. It's a toolkit or a palette of effects that you can it's like an erector set for plugins.
Absolutely, yeah. Inherently we want to create, and this gives us those possibilities with
right.
little to none restrictions. Now we can use our
very restrictions, and it kind of keeps you focused on the music itself too.
Yes.
Because you can just put a bunch of stuff on, maybe turn it off, not use it, tuck it away, but it's there if you need it. And you don't have to move your mouse over and, okay, now I have to instantiate another compressor. Now I have to wait for the list to populate. That's what I think about with my presets, and I'll disable a lot of them to save on CPU, sure. But they're right there with a click of the mouse. If I need them, I don't have to go digging for them.
Absolutely.
And everybody mixes with stuff that they're comfortable with. So the stuff I would put on the drums on one song would be the place I would start on another song, even if it's a different genre. It's still mixing drums.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, any closing thoughts here as we're about to wrap up? Anything else you might find?
I think I hit all my tenets, my religious tenets. Stay current, keep open, and learn. I learn from the most naive musicians sometimes, who they really don't even know what they're doing, but they come up with the coolest stuff. Right. If you think about great pop songs, sometimes they're written by people just off the seat of their pants. And so, don't ever look down on somebody because they're just starting or they're just getting into it. They might be unbelievably creative.
Absolutely.
And I think that applies across the board in all the arts. You can't just say, well, I know how to mix. I don't need to hear anything from you. Sometimes my clients are voicing concerns that are actually mixed concerns, but they don't speak in mixed talk.
Right.
They say, I can't understand my words here, which means, something is masking them. Or I'm not getting that feeling at the chorus, which means, we don't have enough dynamic when the chorus arrives. So, just stay open and stay receptive and keep learning. And don't poo-poo anybody. Don't become a professional sniffer like so many people do. Like, oh, that's not the way I do it. Oh, man. I call them professional sniffers, and I have no esteem for them whatsoever. But somebody that's, that emails me with a question, hey, Dave, I'm just starting out, what am I doing right and what am I doing wrong? I'm not going to give you a lesson, but I will answer your email. I'm happy to share.
Right.
Because guys shared with me, and that's how I got here. I wouldn't be here if guys hadn't shared with me.
Absolutely.
So that's
Absolutely.
super important. And then if you have something that you know about, teach younger people, or not
Right.
even younger, but beginners, like less skillful people, because that's how they're going to get good.
Exactly. That's how I'm here. And so, yeah, I've made it my mission to do the same to,
When I started engineering, I knew nothing. I mean, the amount that I didn't know would fill encyclopedias.
wow.
But I was so happy to have the key to that studio that I stayed all night and I learned how to calibrate the tape machine, and I learned how to route, back to the jukebox section of the Trident. I learned on a Trident board, which now seems super simple, but at the time it was mind blowing.
Right.
And so you just learn as you go. You never, and I'm learning stuff today. I learned about the pin on the window. So now I have a new arsenal, a new part of my arsenal, a new ammunition
Right.
that I can watch. I can watch two kinds of volume meters at the same time. How about that?
There you go. Well,
Great.
speaking,
And as soon as we hang up, I'm going to be mastering a record, and guess what? Those windows are going to be pinned open.
well, look at that.
Done.
Well, Dave,
It's great. Thanks for that, Ryan.
oh,
That's awesome.
hey, I'm honored. Speaking of learning, I'm sure I can speak for everyone. We've all learned a ton from you today.
I
Thank
hope
you
so,
so
man.
much
And
for your
I really
time.
thank everybody. Thanks everybody for taking a minute out. I hope it was useful, and I hope we get to see one another in person very, very soon. New York is actually opening up today. It was
Wow.
the first day back for hairdressers and stuff like that. So I'm going in on Thursday for
Nice.
a session. I'll have a mask. The singer will not, but she'll be bringing her own pop filter, and
Wonderful.
and like that. So we're going to get back there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dave, for your time. Appreciate you. And thank you for sharing your thoughts, insights on StudioRack.
Thanks, Ryan, and I'll see all you guys on the next one.
Thanks, Dave.
Be good.
I